I'm here with Richard Young, our Aduco life science expert, and we are going to be talking about the IVDR and the impact that will have on manufacturers. So, Richard, first question then is, what's changing with the IVDR? What's different between this new regulation and the current directives?
Yeah, the new In-Vitro Diagnostics Regulation is quite a bit different from the In-Vitro Diagnostics Directive. The directive going out in the middle of this year, and the new IVDR coming in. And the IVDR is a very different beast than the previous directive, and much more aligned with the medical devices regulations. In terms of it having risk-based classification of in vitro diagnostics and having a much greater emphasis on a lot of elements in common with medical devices. I think the major change we've got at the moment is proposed extensions to the periods associated with different classifications of products.
Brilliant, thank you, Richard. So recently there was a proposal made to extend the transition period from the IVD directive to the new regulation. What does this mean for everyone in the industry, and what should they be doing?
I think in the case of some customers and some manufacturers out there, I think the initial impact is a great sigh of relief, because the imminent application of the In-Vitro Diagnostics Regulation was causing a lot of concerns from an implementation perspective because of the very poor resourcing of the in vitro diagnostic side in terms of notified bodies indicated under the In-Vitro Diagnostics Regulation. There's very few of them out there. We're short on notified bodies from medical devices. We were even shorter on on in vitro diagnostics, and that's a big impact for this, because we're estimating where under the directive 80 to 90% of in vitro diagnostics did not require the intervention of a notified body. Under the new regulation, 80 to 90% of in vitro diagnostics actually do require the intervention of a notified body to apply the CE mark and bring them to market. So rather than the implementation starting as of the middle of this year, we have some new proposals out there that haven't been approved by the Commission yet, but look very likely to be approved by the Commission. Because for the majority of manufacturers, the dates as written are not attainable. And they work by risk classification. So the highest D class, the proposal has the highest D class products with the highest risks, with an extension out until May 2025. C class devices to May 2026. And B and A class devices, or A class devices which are marketed in sterile condition, out to May 2027. The longest dates are out there is a significant change and extension over the dates that were originally published with the regulation, which shows you how short the resources actually are. This does sound like a lot of time. It genuinely does, but there are some significant changes in the regulations, and manufacturers need quite a bit of time to address the expanded requirements of the regulation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. You mentioned there's a lot of changes. So do you want to highlight some of them, such as notified bodies, the risk classification process, and the performance requirements and the data needed?
Yeah, no troubles at all. As we've already mentioned, the notified bodies are getting much more involved in the regulation of in vitro diagnostics, and the importance of in vitro diagnostics and the extent they're being used to us really justifies that focus on them. In recent years, we've seen our reliance as a community, as communities, on things like in vitro diagnostics used to detect COVID as part of responses to pandemics and things like that. So in vitro diagnostics are pretty important things, and increasingly so as people get more involved in their looking after themselves, really. So what we're seeing there is that emphasis comes with additional regulation, partly because the medical devices side has moved forward and dragged in vitro diagnostics with it. And we've got this risk-based classification. So more notified bodies, as I've already said, we're going to have a lot more notified bodies in there, and they're going to be involved in the regulation of a lot of products that previously did not suffer third-party scrutiny. And they're going to be looking very closely at those products and the way they do that. And as I've already mentioned, we have 4 risk classifications of in vitro diagnostic products, which we're now going to be working to. That's a big departure. We have sort of the list A, list B products that were subject to notified body intervention in the directive. Now we've got a risk process that can be applied to the intended use and intended application of in vitro diagnostics, with Class D being the highest risk products, those products where we expect that the consequences of misdiagnosis can have a very serious impact to the person utilizing the test, which could possibly be life-threatening, down to the A class of devices which don't need the intervention of a notified body, which is sort of the bottom end of in vitro diagnostics. They generally characterized as things like sample pots and bits of disposable equipment used to really support the actual conducting of a diagnosis there. So that's sort of the spectrum we've got there, and we've got a series of rules that are allowing us to look at each individual type of device and its intended use, and figure out which risk classification it goes in, and how we're going to have to engage with our notified bodies, because the majority of manufacturers are going to have to, how we're going to have to do them, and what the appropriate risk classification is for each product. The general safety and performance requirements for the in vitro diagnostic products, very similar to medical devices. We're asking the same questions about labeling and risk management and usability that the medical devices side is doing. So there's a lot of commonality between the two regulations. You've read one, you're pretty well there with the other one, and very common approaches to the presentation and content of documentation, which probably leads us on to the major shift to most manufacturers of in vitro diagnostics is going to be the emphasis on the material content of this, of the evidence, the technical documentation that's brought together to demonstrate conformity, to allow the CE marking process to go ahead. And since it's being scrutinized by third parties, compliance with standards and scientifically valid approaches to the assessment of data, the specificity, the reproducibility, the analytical performance of our in vitro diagnostics is going to be under a lot of scrutiny. It's going to have to be scientifically valid. So we're going to have to think about statistics and sample sizes and things like that when we're developing protocols and reporting results. And we're going to be really, really, really having to get a lot more professional about all those elements in detail. And that's going to carry on from the manufacturing development stage through to ongoing monitoring of the performance of our products in the field, and post-market evaluation, performance evaluation plans of how we're going to make sure that our diagnostics remain relevant for their intended use in the market as we go forwards. So there's a lot of things to think about there. So some of those dates I mentioned earlier sound a long way away, but to get all of that sorted out and get a strategy established for a company's portfolio takes a lot of time to do well and do properly for the future of the organization. So it's not as much time as it sounds like.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. And finally, one last question. You obviously mentioned there quite a few bits or areas that need to be addressed when moving to the IVDR. What do you think are the sort of top, maybe 2 or 3 things that manufacturers should be doing to prepare? What do you think they should be doing now ahead of this transition, especially as it's been extended as well? What should people be doing?
Yeah, as I think you should say, Alex, the extension may give some people a false sense of security that the D-Day is a long way down the line, and in some cases it is. It does take the pressure off in a lot of ways immediately, but I think it should create the space for organisations to actually do some real planning to make sure that those dates are achievable, because they're not. If this extension the proposed extension is actually approved, it's not going to happen again. This isn't going to happen twice. So it's really, those are the dates I quoted earlier, are drop dead dates there. And I think the first thing an organisation needs to do is really step back and look at their current portfolio and their planned introduction of new diagnostics and have a plan together. Really, really emphasise the planning and possibly the starting point for organisations which have got a broad portfolio of products is actually start making some strategic decisions about which ones, look at the costs of getting the information I've already mentioned together, which are not insignificant in some cases, depending on the claims your product's making, and make some pretty fundamental decisions about which ones, depending on your classification of your product, which ones you want to actually take beyond those dates, or which ones you're going to invest in. Few organisations will look at their entire portfolio and decide that they're prepared to invest in everything as it is today. The strategic decision will have to be made, and the investment in getting this post-market performance data is going on an ongoing basis is not going to be insignificant, nor is basic scientific data to underpin the technical documentation to prove that the product works as we say it does. So sort of a continuum of things there. So a plan, a strategy based on the portfolio and future portfolios, and really having a clear idea of where we're going and what information we need to gather to get at it is pretty critical.
And Richard, what about the situation in the UK at the moment with Brexit and the UKCA mark? How does that apply to the IVD industry?
That's a very interesting question. That's a fairly fluid answer at the moment, I think. As part of the Brexit legal shenanigans, the In-Vitro Diagnostics Directive was adopted into UK law, but the UK Competent Authority, the MHRA, started a consultation to alter the UK law to basically more closely reflect the IVDR. In the future, we don't have a date about when that will be published. Very similar for medical devices as well, was part of the same consultation process that ran from August last year. We don't know when that's going to be published. At the moment, UK law says that CE marked products are acceptable in the UK until the middle of 2023. We expect that date to change as we move forwards, because if we're moving into a similar regulatory risk-based process as represented and discussed about the IVDR, the UK-based conformity assessment bodies who are okay for the UK for in vitro diagnostics are pretty well non-existent at the moment. The European resources are poor. UK resources are very, very poor. So we expect that date to move significantly, maybe in line with the proposed extension dates for the IVDR. So years basically, probably 2025 or later, just because otherwise there aren't going to be any products on the market, which is sort of not the intention, we believe, at the end of the day. So a lot of work to be done there, a lot of resources to be found, a lot of the to be done forward there. As manufacturers, you need to be looking at your notified bodies and see if they are actually applying to be supporting the UKCA mark, if the UK is an important strategic market for you. And planning ahead, I could only advise you to plan to meet the requirements of the In-Vitro Diagnostics Regulations from a technical perspective, because that should give you more than sufficient information to support an application for UKCA marking when that becomes more clear.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure.